Yeah.
How's it gonna? Yeah.
Hello, one and all, and welcome to Upper Room Ministries Sunday School here in Dover, Pennsylvania. So glad that you've joined us today. Today we are beginning a brand new teaching series in the book of Proverbs. Yes, we're going to dig in and explore every little bit of wisdom and knowledge that Proverbs has to offer. Now, what are Proverbs? Well, Proverbs are basically they're wise sayings, little bits of wisdom contained in single sentences. And Proverbs are not unique simply to just to the Bible. No, Proverbs are found everywhere, in every country, in every culture, in every people group. And Proverbs go back hundreds, some even thousands of years. And yet they are still quoted today simply because they're truth. You know, they're all genuine wisdom. But the thing about wisdom, that is true wisdom, it all comes from God, the biblical God, the one and only God. And that is the purpose of this study, you know, to uncover wisdom for all kinds of situations. And whether it be financial situations, personal relationships, work, rest, sickness, you name it. The book of Proverbs offers wisdom on all kinds of subjects. And Proverbs, every single proverb that we're going to uncover in this study comes from God Himself. After all, every bit of Scripture is Spirit inspired. That is, the Holy Spirit. And now the majority of these Proverbs were written by King Solomon. And Solomon, as you know, he received the gift of wisdom from God. It's something that he asked for, and which God gave unto him. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. But first, let's go over the structure of the book of Proverbs. Okay. Chapters 1 through 9. We have the invitation and the instruction of wisdom. It's presumed these chapters were written by Solomon, but that's not entirely certain. Okay? Next section, chapters 10 all the way through chapter 22, verse 16. These are Solomon's Proverbs. And then chapter 22, 17, all the way through chapter 24. We have sayings from the wise. Okay, and then chapter 25, all the way through the end of chapter 29. We have Solomon's Proverbs that were translated by Hezekiah's men. And then chapters 30 and 31, they were not written by Solomon. Chapter 30 was written by Agur, and chapter 31, verses 1 through 9, they were written by King Lemuel's mother. Yes, we have a female writer in the Bible. How about that? Okay. Now let's get back to Solomon, as he is our primary writer of the book of Proverbs. Let's read, starting in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 4. Now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I give you?" And Solomon said, You have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. Now, he refers to himself as a little child, even though he's not just an adult, but he's also a king. And it's important that he presents himself as a little child. Jesus said, unless you come as a little child, you by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. So it's very important to have that childlike humility and childlike faith in God. But I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore give your servant an understanding of heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? So, God said, ask, what shall I give you? He could have asked for anything. He could have asked for anything to satisfy his own personal pleasures. But instead, he realized the responsibility he had as king. And he needed wisdom and understanding in order to be a good king, to be a good leader. His focus was not upon himself, but upon God and the people. He put himself last. Verse 10. The speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. Then God said to him, because you have asked this thing, and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice, behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall anyone like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. So if you walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, I will lengthen your days. So, God was very pleased with Solomon that he chose wisdom over riches, over long life, over the defeat of his enemies. And not only did God give Solomon wisdom, but he gave him all those other things. That right there shows you how much God values wisdom. Okay? And wisdom is not reserved exclusively for kings or people in high places like Solomon. Now it's available to anybody who asks. The book of James says, if any of you lack wisdom, ask God, and he shall give it to you liberally. As long as you believe, he's going to give it to you. So if you ask God for wisdom and you believe you're going to get it, you'll get it. God's word promises that. All right. Moving on down to verse 16. Probably the most famous example of Solomon using wisdom. Now 2 women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. And one woman said, O my lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then it happened the 3rd day after I'd given birth that this woman also gave birth. And we were together. No one was with us in the house except the 2 of us in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant slept. laid him in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I rose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was dead. But when I examined him in the morning, indeed he was not my son whom I had borne. Then the other woman said, No, but the living one is my son, and the dead one is yours. And the first one said, No, but the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. Thus they spoke before the king. And the king says, the one says, This is my son who lives, and your son is the dead one. And the other says, No, but your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one. Then the king said, Bring me a sword. So they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other. Now, as you can see, this solution is absurd. It's ridiculous. Solomon is just saying, just kill the child. Split him in half. I mean, who thinks of stuff like this? Well, only somebody who has the wisdom of God. Only somebody who can foresee what the response is going to be. Okay? Continuing in verse 26, Then the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, for she yearned with compassion for her son. And she said, O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him. But the other said, Let him be neither mine nor yours, but divide him. So the king answered and said, Give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. Now, one said, Give the other woman the child, and the other said, May your will be done. Divide him in half. Kill the child. And you see, Solomon had the wisdom to realize that a woman who would replace her dead baby with another's living baby and try to pass it off as her own child is a woman of very low moral fiber, a very wicked person. I mean, only a wicked person would dare do such a thing. And thus, the king expected that the wicked woman, the one whose son had died, would give such a response. Because surely a woman who was wicked enough to switch her dead child with a living one would most certainly not mind the child being dead. Her mentality is, my son is dead, so should your son be dead. But he had the wisdom to realize that mentality, and thus came up with that rather absurd solution. You know, he had the wisdom to properly judge character. And that to me is just brilliant. It's just the kind of wisdom that only God could possibly provide. Nobody could think that up on their own. All right. And let's now turn to chapter 4, starting in verses 29. These verses, further expound on the wisdom of Solomon. And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart like the sand on the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of all the East, and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Oh, 3,000 proverbs. So that tells us not every proverb that Solomon spoke is in the book of Proverbs. Only a small percentage are actually available. So there are some that either weren't written down or simply did not survive when the Bible was put together. But we need to be thankful for the Proverbs that we do have, because these Proverbs were spoken by a man who was wiser than all men. Wiser than all men. And therefore his words, his advice, need to be taken seriously. And also says his songs were 1,005. Well, there's only one song of Solomon's in the Bible, the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon. So there were a lot that were lost, that are unknown. Still, we've got to be thankful for the one song that we do have. Okay. Verse 33, he also spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon even to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He also spoke of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and of fish, and men of all nations, from all kings of the earth, who had heard of his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. So let's look at this. He spoke of trees, and he spoke of hyssop. He spoke of animals, birds, creeping things, and fish. So he also had wisdom and insight on botany and zoology. He had wisdom that covered a wide range of topics that weren't necessarily tied to being a king. And yet he had wisdom for everybody to hear, even people outside of the kingdom. I mean, men of all nations came to hear Solomon. What a witness that is. Men from all these nations, these Gentile nations, coming to the king of Israel to receive advice. That's a great witness, where they actually see the wisdom of God through this king of Israel, a chosen one of Israel. Okay. And this is why it's so important that as believers we are to use our talents to glorify God. And when God gives us something, we need to use them to the best of our abilities. God wants a multiplication. He wants a harvest. And I believe our gifts and talents are a means of witnessing to others, where they see this kind of brilliance, and all the glory goes to God. All right. Okay. Well, now that we have insight on the wisdom of Solomon, let's begin our study. Okay. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. This is referred to as the prologue of the book of Proverbs. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. To give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel, to understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Okay. This basically lays out the purpose of these proverbs. What the ultimate goal, the ultimate task of providing these words of wisdom are. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. Now, the word understanding is going to come up quite a bit here in the book of Proverbs. Understanding is basically the opposite of confusion. God is not the author of confusion. The devil is. God is the author of understanding. He wants us to understand his ways He also wants us to understand his signs, his prophecies, his dreams and visions. The Pharisees had no clue who Jesus was. And Jesus chastised them for their lack of understanding. And the truth was, if they truly understood all the messianic prophecies of the first coming of Christ, they would realize that Jesus really was what he said. He is the Messiah. He is the coming one. The problem was he didn't look like what they thought the Messiah would be. Everyone thought the Messiah would be this great political leader who would move them out from under the iron fist of the Roman Empire. But no, that's not how he came. He came as this meek little sheep who was to die for all of humanity. That's what his purpose was. And you read Isaiah 53 and you read Psalm 22. That tells you exactly what the Messiah's purpose was, to die. But they didn't understand. Okay. To receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. Yes, we are to gain an understanding of justice, judgment, and equity, and how to properly administer them, how to properly discern what is right and what is wrong. To give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. Now, the word simple refers to the naive, and yet very open. Now, the simple are the people who just don't know where they're supposed to go, but they're open to learning. They want to learn where to go. They're ones looking for direction, and that's what wisdom provides. It provides direction. That's what the Proverbs provide. Okay. To the young man, knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning. A man of understanding will attain wise counsel, to understand a proverb and an enigma. The words of the wise and their riddles. Now, let's compare and let's contrast a wise man and a foolish man. And it's quite striking, what the differences are. It's very ironic, actually, because a man who is wise will know that he doesn't know everything. A truly wise man will know that he has only obtained a small amount of knowledge in his lifetime, a small amount of wisdom in his lifetime, and he will, of course, want to learn more so he can gain more. The foolish man, on the other hand, thinks he knows it all. A foolish man thinks there's nothing more for him to learn. He's got it all figured out. How ironic. The wise man says, I don't know hardly anything, and the foolish man says, I know everything. Sounds completely opposite, and yet it's absolutely true, according to the Bible, of course. To understand a proverb, an enigma, the words of the wise and the riddles. A man of understanding will attain wise counsel. A man who understands also understands that he needs help in understanding greater and deeper things, such as an enigma and the riddles of the wise. A man who has understandings knows there are just things that are beyond his understandings, and will thus seek out understanding. He will attain wise counsel. And finally, verse 7, a very famous verse in the book of the Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. What is the fear of the Lord? You know, a lot of people have a lot of different ideas, but I believe the fear of the Lord begins when you understand how huge and how powerful He is, and just how puny the rest of us are. I mean, when you're in the presence of a being like that, and you know you're so small, you're of course are going to be overwhelmed by fear. You're just going to be overwhelmed by the awesomeness of God. I believe that's what the genuine fear of God is, an acknowledgement of how great and powerful He is. Okay? And the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. You see, all knowledge, all understanding of the universe, begins with one question I've learned in my lifetime, and that question is there a God? Because if there is a God, if there is a creator, then life has meaning, life has purpose. If there is no God, if everything exists purely by accident, then really life itself is meaningless. There's no point to it. I mean, we were nothing before we were born, and we become nothing when we die. No matter how we live, how long we live, how short we live, how good we live or how evil we live, we all end up the same way, as nothing. Therefore, it's all meaningless. And really, the beginning of knowledge begins with that perspective. An understanding of the universe really begins with that perspective. Does life have meaning, or does it have no meaning? That's where it all begins. All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will continue our study next time.